So today we'll be talking about set 16 initial observations and outliers brought to you by ARA. And today I'll be your host, Funkster. So primary things we're going to be going over are some 5 cost units are like Targon, which are the traitless units this set. 3 costs definitely define the early and mid game a lot. And we'll be going over these 3 top comps that are dominating the meta right now. But first, let's talk about 5 costs. Some of the 5 cost set can be played with traitless on your board, and this is because they have their own signature traits already that give team-wide buffs. So, for example, Fiddlesticks, Lucian, Senna, and Shyvana, those are the 3 main 5 costs I really want to talk about, just because, right, those are the ones that give those team-wide buffs. Lucian Senna is by far the best 5 costs that can be just splashed on. You do not need Gunslinger to make them do a lot of damage. And their passive is whenever Lucian is out, you get damage amp for your board, and whenever Senna is out, you get damage reduction for your entire board. Fiddlesticks has a passive where the enemy units lose 10 magic resist and 10 armor. And Shyvana, when she transforms and casts, she has a passive that gives your team 10% damage reduction against enemy abilities. So with these noted, you don't really need like Vanquisher active for Fiddlesticks to get value. And something to note is that Fiddlesticks is like a stun tank, right? When he initially casts, he fears the largest clump of enemies nearby him. And for Shyvana, like it's nice to have Juggernaut active to keep Shyvana a little tankier, but the 10% durability against abilities is more than enough for her to get value just standalone. And we will revisit this idea when we talk about top comps, because a lot of the top comps right now have a lot of like open slots that can be filled in with any of these 5 costs. And the one last 5 cost I really want to talk about is any Tibbers, just because for the price of 15 gold, you gain both a tank and a backline unit for the price of 1 2-star 5 cost. Which means that as long as you hit any 2, your board is a lot more stable than it is. One quick question we see here is, do you position Fiddle in the first row or second row? Definitely just second row. Fiddle isn't the tankiest unit, and you want to make sure he gets his cast off, as well as he doesn't tank aggro for when he casts, and he might get focused down. There are sometimes Fiddle can actually cast twice in a fight. And yes, he has a 2 hex range. With that being said, just keep in mind, like the 5 costs, it's very different from previous sets, where 5 costs you would just kind of ignore the ones that you don't play on your board. I think a very big meme that was a thing was like last set when you were playing Leona, Yumi, Battle Academia, Yumi, and you hit a random 5 cost on your board. Oh, don't care. You're gonna just sell it. Oh, you random Varus on your board. You're gonna just sell it and not play around it. But in this set, if you hit a random 5 cost, it can very, very easily slot into your board. So let's move down a little bit in terms of the cost, and let's talk about 3 costs a little bit now. So as for the 3 costs, a lot of the 3 costs are very strong, and it's really important to play around them early. Here's a really quick list that we kind of compiled: Ahri, Draven, Gangplank, Leona, Loris, Emilio, Nautilus, and Zoe. All these units are very strong in and of itself, and some of these units are even stronger with like the traits that they provide. For example, Gangplank and Nautilus are both Bilgewater units that you want early for 3 and 5 Bilgewater. You also have units like Leona, Loris, which are just very, very tanky in and of itself. And Loris is a piltover unit that gives you the splash. Leona gives you anti-heal. And then Zoe, Ahri, Draven are just good backline item holders in terms of Zoe, and also Zoe has built-in shred and chill. These units, like their power level is just above average on the whole scale of things. And a lot of the times when you feel like your opener is a little weak or homeless, it's very important to kind of just see what 3 costs you natural on your shops, and see if you can play around them to maybe salvage a stronger stage 3. And going forward, also talking about how at previous events we talked about how stage 3 is a little bit more important as well, with how the damage stage damage has went up. So definitely playing your opener, playing the units that you hit, conserving early HP is definitely more important. Playing tempo in general. And then in comparison, right, 1 and 2 costs are definitely good when they're 2-starred, but they are truly just trait bots otherwise. I will say there are some notable 2 costs, such as Aphelios, Scion, so that you can unlock LeBlanc, Twisted Fate, so that you can unlock Graves, Vi, which is a pretty strong unit in and of itself, and then Teemo Tristana for 4 Yordle. Otherwise, you're not the biggest fan about playing on 2 costs, but I think the outlier is just like Aphelios, who is like very strong in and of itself. And just to reiterate, obviously when I say about playing around these 3 costs, don't play them if your items don't make sense for them. For example, if I have like an IE, I'm not going to be playing around a Zoe. Just make sure the items make sense around the 3 costs you hit, and don't tunnel on a specific 3 cost. All of them are very, very like flexible, and you can play around them. And so those blue orbs that we get on stage 1 become a lot more important. And yeah, as you level up your higher level shops, whatever you natural on early stage 3 and late stage 3, just definitely keep an eye out for those units. Now I want to talk about like these outliers of top comps. These 3 comps, Bilgewater, Fast 9, and Kindred, Lucian, Senna, Freljord, are definitely the 3 comps that take the 1-2 slots most games. And here's kind of how to play them and how to pilot them, I guess. So Bilgewater, really focused around Lucky Doubloon. Something to note is that Lucky Doubloon is only obtainable on 5 Bilgewater. You cannot obtain it on 3 Bilgewater. You cannot see it on 7 Bilgewater. You can only see it on 5, which is important because I see there are sometimes people get early 7 Bilgewater, but they reroll their shops on 7 Bilgewater rather than rolling on 5 Bilgewater for Lucky Doubloon. Yes, it is also important to note that Doubloon will be getting a nerf around on Monday or Tuesday-ish. But at least for the weekend, definitely still note that it is very good and you still play around it in 5 Bilgewater. I feel like even if it gets nerfed, the value that it gives is just really good. And so now this moves on to like the next important thing, is this toggling. What toggling means is that the Bilgewater shops is actually based on whatever you have on your board right now. It's not based on your previous combat. So you're not locked out of like a 7 Bilgewater shop, or like you're not locked out of a 7 Bilgewater shop if you had 5 Bilgewater last turn. You can bench the units that you can keep the Bilgewater units on your bench, put them onto the board to activate 7 Bilgewater, and use the shop that way, and then so those shop odds will now be 7 Bilgewater shops. This is really important because the unit quality of 7 Bilgewater isn't the best. You're gonna have like a random Fizz on your board. You might have a GP that has no Vanquisher on or no Slayer active. Those units are just a lot more dead, and you would much rather play other quality units such as like Wukong or Swain, for example. And so here, here we can see that we have 2 boards. Just to like visualize the hanging traits, is on the left we see the 5 Bilgewater core, where you play around Graves MF to give yourself the 2 Gunslinger ready, and then you have Alawi, Nautilus, and TF. Nautilus, Alawi have almost encompass all the frontline traits there are in the game: Bruiser, Juggernaut, and Warden, which allows you to click Wukong, like Swain. You can click Braum, just honestly anything. Honestly, almost all the 4-cost frontliners, as well as some 5-cost frontliners as well. And in Twisted Fate, if you hit like a random Kindred, you're happy to like play it for Quick Striker. So, and then on the right, we'll see like the 3 Bilgewater core. When you start dropping out of Graves and TF, you can play Senna over Graves as a better gunslinger. And depending if you're playing around Quick Striker, you don't need TF, you don't need Twisted Fate on your board, or you can play a different Quick Striker, which I'll explain in the next slide here. So to reiterate, you have the hanging traits such as Bruiser, Warden, and Juggernaut, and you can legitimately just play any frontline. Here, we see that we have Swain, Braum, Wukong, and Taric. These are all the 4-cost frontline units, and they all just have some way of synergizing with Nautilus and Tahm Kench. Later, I also put down the 5-cost equivalents, and the ones that you want to kind of swap in and out for. You have Shyvana, who is a better, if you have Shyvana 2, it's a better Juggernaut than Swain 2. Orin, I wouldn't say Orin is necessarily a better 5-cost in terms of unit strength, but if you have the ability to farm a artifact item off Orin, you can play him as your Warden instead. And then you also have Volibear, which you will eventually get as you feed Tom Kench health, and as you feed him health, you would just unlock Volibear very, very easily. You don't have to go out of your way to unlock Volibear. It's important to note that Lucian Senna is the normal dual carry of this comp, just because they are the other gunslinger, and they're really strong with their passive, as we talked about. But as we cap out the board, you can also just play around Kindred and Ashe. Kindred and any one quick striker. And in this case, we'll play around Ashe a lot. The reason being is because you can cap around playing Freljord on your final board with the board on the bottom. You can see that you have Volibear, Braum, and Ashe as your 3 Freljord units that synergize really well with Tahm Kench, Nautilus, and Kindred. And then you, as we talked about before, you just play the splashable 5 cost. You play Shyvana. In this case, you do have Juggernaut for Shyvana, but you can also just play Random Fiddle for Vanquisher. You could play Azir. You could play Taric. This slot is very, very open and very free for whatever you want to play. And so this is part of like the flexibility of Bilgewater, and kind of part of its strength is that you're not limited to any one 4-cost frontliner. Any of them fit for your board. Just whatever you hit, as long as you're stable, and you can go 9 off of that. But definitely a lot of information here to take in at once. But hopefully this helps kind of visualize why Bilgewater is so strong right now. Oh, I forgot to mention about Bilgewater items. The Lucky Doubloon will help you farm these Silver Serpents, to which you want to be refreshing your shops on 7 Bilgewater to get the tier 2, the quote-unquote tier 2, or the specialty Bilgewater items that all work really well on Misfortune. Almost all of the backline ones are good on Misfortune, and Pile of Citrus is one of the strongest. Pile of Citrus is one of the strongest frontline one, and Bar Knuckles is not bad at all. In the case where you miss Lucky Doubloon, you could still play around this core, just because the unit, as we can see, the trait tree just fits really well. One of the issues for sure is that you will be capping a lot lower, just because you don't have these extra items. But you can still be playing around Misfortune, Nautilus, and like Tahm Kench as a core. Either you stay in this core, or we can also pivot to playing some Freljord, Kindred, Lucian, Senna, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, where we have a dedicated slide to talk about that. So moving on, the second comp that I really want to talk about that is like an outlier is Annie Fast 9. The reason why Annie Fast 9 is so strong is just because, as we talked about before, Annie Tibbers is like a package. It's like a free package of frontline and backline for the price of 1. Tibbers 2 is normally tankier than Swain 2, although Swain 2 does provide more utility. And the one thing to really note though is that Annie needs at least 2 mana generation items. You can make 3 mana generation items, which would make Annie a little weaker in terms of like the damage she deals, but I would always prioritize at least having 2 mana generation items to play towards Annie Tibbers. If I don't have 2 mana generation items, I might stray away from playing around Annie Fast 9. Now, the other unit to note is Silas. Silas is a 7 cost that requires a unlock condition of selling a Jarvan 2, a Garen 2, and a Lux 2. Truth be told, it's actually not the hardest unlock, just because all you really need to do is just hold Garen and hold Lux and hold Jarvan. You only end up losing 2 gold by buying and selling these units, because it doesn't require you to field them on the board at all. But the one thing to note is that Silas really wants at least like 1 healing item. He is still that melee carry that can still die if it gets focused too hard, and that healing item can, give him that sustain that he needs. And going back to the unlock condition, yeah, it's just important to hold Jarvan. Jarvan might be the bottleneck of honestly finding Silas, just because you're going to be rolling on level 9, your 1-cost odds are not the best, and if you miss Jarvan 2, you're not going to find Silas 2. You're not going to find Silas. Moving forward, I think it's important to note to like have one Nico. Nico and Silas both have the same exact traits basically. They both Defender Arcanist, and they fit really well together. And this is primarily for when you play towards the 6 Arcanist board. We'll be talking about different boards as we go to the next slide, but Nico is just kind of nice to have for the middle, for like your transition turns. And finally, you have like 2 open slots, I would say, where you can just splash whatever 5 costs 2 stars. You 2-star on the roll down, and we just go back to like the golden triangle of Senna, Lucian, Fiddle, and Shyvana. They're just the best 5 costs to splash. And then finally, you can also the ways you can play any fast 9 is either from Demacia, and tempoing off Demacia, maybe getting Galio, unlocking Galio, or just from Yordles and playing around like Kabuko and Kennen, and maybe item holding Teemo. So part 2 of this, where we talk about like kind of the boards, you have the first generic 6 Arcanist version, where you play Sylas, Swain, Tibbers, Nico, any Lux as your 6 Arcanist, and you play Shyvana for Juggernaut on your Swain, and you can either main tank Swain or Tibbers. Both are fine. Tibbers a little bit tankier as a unit as a whole. This gives you 2 open slots where one of them could very well just be a Fiddle, or it could be a Lucian Senna, or a Taric, or a Skarner, just anything. Anything that provides your board with some kind of buff. And I say that if you do unlock Galio from playing around Demacia early, you can play around any Demacian unit. So for example, you could play around Xin Zhao, which gives you Warden, and play around Orin that way. Just because you have 1 out of 3 Demacia in terms of Lux, and you want to just get Galio onto the board in that variation. Although the thing I will want to mention is that this kind of 6 Arcanist board has fallen out of popularity, and there are higher cap versions, which we will talk about now, which is the Vi, Seraphine, Azir. You drop out of Nico and Lux, and you play Vi, Seraphine, and Azir for Disruptor. This way, you still get Defender active, which is a team-wide buff, but you also get Piltover active, which is kind of like in between a silver and a gold augment with a value sometimes, which is kind of crazy for a trait. And this is definitely a higher cap. You can start itemizing. You can duo carry Azir. You can trio carry Azir after you itemize Sylas, and you also get Shirimans as you unlock, so you can play around Nasus if you need another tank, Renekton, or even Xerath for the highest cap. And then finally, you have the Ionian Yordle version, where you'll be playing from 8 Yordle most of the time, where you lose out when you lose or like Mixed Shriek stage 4. But the big key point is that you will be unlocking Kennen and Kabuko already, and probably have them 2-starred on your board. From this spot, you keep Kennen and Kabuko from the Yordle board, you sell everything, all the other Yordles, but you also buy Set Wukong on your roll down. You unlock Set and you buy Wukong on your roll down, and also buy Zillion. This is because Set is a really underplayed 5 cost that also likes to hold very similar items to Sylas. So before you even hit, if you don't hit Sylas on your initial roll down, you're not like completely screwed. You can just put those AP items on your Set, and also Swain is like very highly contested sometimes, or maybe you don't hit any too. You can put items on your Wukong too as a primary tank for the time being. I like this version a lot just because the board is just kind of very flexible. Obviously, I showed you a very cookie cutter board right here, but the Swain slot can be very free. You don't need to play Swain for 4 Arcanist. I've seen pro players just stay on 3 out of 4 Arcanist, and it's perfectly fine. And also the Zillion spot, like Invoker is very nice for your Annie as well. But if you hit a random Senna 2, Lucian 2, Senna Lucian 2, just play that, right? And right. I think if anything, I think Shyvana is more of like a unit that you can play in on level, just because that's how you get Juggernaut on your board, or something like that. But if you hit a random Shyvana 2, I'll play random Shyvana 2. I just think that this Set unit is very underrated right now. Just because I think Ionia is in a very weird spot, which is why Set is in a weird spot. But Set as a damage dealer in and of himself should not be undermined. And so I just really like this version of the Any Fast Line board. Moving on to the final composition that I really want to talk about. And we have Kindred, Lucian, Senna, Freljord. The core that you play around is Braum, Sejuani, Ashe, and this is obvious. I didn't mention this, but this is also another fast line comp. You play around Braum, Sejuani, Ashe, just because these are the units that are not locked behind any unlocks, and this gives you your 3 Freljord. You can play Lower Spy now, next, for the 2 Piltover, and it synergizes with Defender and Warden between Loris and Braum and buy into 20. And then that Ash gives you that Quick Striker for your Kindred. It's important to note that Kindred wants attack speed AD items, such as Razorblade Kraken. And normally in this comp, you do carry Lucian Senna without Gunslinger. You do not need Gunslinger for Lucian Senna to do damage. They normally want more casting AD items, such as Shojin, IE, but looking at the stats earlier, Lucian Senna kind of excels with any items. And then here we see that we're 7 out of 9 slots. You can just flex any, you can play any Splashable frontliner as well. Play on Orin, which gives you 3 Warden. You can play around Naked Shyvana, or if you want to play Shyvana with like more tanky items, you can play Shyvana Nautilus for that Warden Juggernaut connection. Or you can just play Fiddle for that stun. Tarek is also a very fine option. Skarner if you have him unlocked. Just anything in these slots. And this just really reiterates my first point of this presentation, which is these 5 costs are just very splashable, and you do not need the trait for them to be good. And with that being said though, I think we have reached the end of kind of the initial observations and outliers. Hopefully that all this information is a little eye-opening in terms of how to play your openers, what to focus on throughout the game, and kind of what you want to play for towards the end of the game. These boards, although these boards are fast 9, you can play like level 8 into these end boards. For example, like you could be playing 7 Demacia level 8 to play, and then pivot into fast 9 into Annie as a cap. Or you could be playing around Yunara Freljord, Yunara like Ionian Freljord, and you can pivot into Kindred Lucian Senna as a cap. These are like ways you want to end your board, but it's important to know like how to get to these spots, because not every game is fast 9able. It's just not realistic, and that's why it's important to play around these 3 costs. They are kind of your ticket to fast 9 if you're able to play around your board, your upgrades, and play tempo TFT. But yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I hope this is helpful, and we'll open this up to questions. Any questions now? Let's go with the first one. Could you talk about how you think about itemizing the threat type 5 cost? I think that itemizing it wise, like TG is just the best, right? It just gives them like value on items. Like Fiddle can hold frontline items and AP items. Shyvana can hold AD items and tank items. I think Lucian Senna is the one that you have to be more kind of conscientious about itemizing, where you need AD items for him and her. But yeah, definitely TGs have gone up in value. The Prismatic Band of Thieves 2, I remember the name is, has gone up in value a lot because of the threat like 5 costs. Other than that though, I would say Fiddle does like mana generation. I would say Fiddle really likes Vow. Shyvana, if you are to itemize her, really likes to make like AD bruiser items, such as BT Titans, like even DB looks really good on, like feels really good on Shyvana, honestly. But I wouldn't prioritize itemizing them at all. Hopefully that answers your question. How do you evaluate econ versus item augment for early tempo board? So that's a great question, just because. But the issue with that question is it just really depends on your board on 2-1. Do you have any upgrades you're playing around? Do you think your board is strong by itself? If it's strong by itself, maybe we could take an item tempo augment to capitalize on the fact that we have upgraded 1 cost, or like we have strong 3 costs to play around. That's definitely spot dependent, but I would say generically, econ is just safer if you're scared about like, if you're scared that you're not good at recognizing like, oh, is my board actually that strong? And econ is a little bit of a safer option, but I think it's important to try and like limit test maybe to see like, oh, and how good am I recognizing if my board is strong or not? So that's how I would talk about like econ, early tempo. Also, combat is just, in my opinion, a little bit less desired. I know some different people have differing opinions on this, but I would much rather have items that give me tempo rather than having a combat that gives me tempo. And I would much rather have like money to make sure I can get to like, I would rather have money that I can maybe use to level and play a stronger board, or money to like make sure I'll be strong around by stage 3 and have money to like slight roll a little bit. I mean, Psycho makes a very good point that if you're not playing one of the top lines, you are probably playing for a 30-6, and combat does spike you earlier just because like you get the value of combat instantly. So there's that. How much gold worth of 5 costs are really realistic to hold on rolldowns versus econ? That's a difficult. It just depends on like what if you hit your primary units yet. So if you didn't hit your primary units yet, like for example, let's say we're playing Fast 9 Annie, and we aren't Annie 2 yet, maybe I'll be less inclined to hold random 5 costs. But if I'm paired on a 5 cost, I'm definitely holding it, just because if I do 2-star that random 5 cost, it's stronger than like maybe whatever 1-star 5 cost I have on my board. It's like any way to make your board stronger. There are games where I'm like holding like 10 to 20 gold worth of units in terms of 5 costs on my bench, just because like I need to figure out, you know, those are my transition turns. I need to figure out like, is it worth it to hold? And it's hard to give you like an exact answer. It really just depends on like how much of your board have you hit. Moving on, how to lucky gloves. Yep. Aren't item augments really popular, especially because you have a lot of units itemized? Exactly. Yep. Which is why like Band of Thieves 2 is so nice, or like item augments in general are very nice. Would you say comeback story is an outlier that you should take no matter what? I wouldn't say you should take it no matter what, because right now I feel like the lose streak line, if you take comeback story, is actually playing around Lysandra and Invoker Freljord. Like previously in PvE, comeback story was really good, right? Because you could take comeback story and just sack and play into Singed, which was overtuned. But now with Singed being nerfed and everything, comeback story is just a little scarier, and I just think that you must play it into like something that spikes you stage 4. So you play into a level 8 comp that is already decent, but I wouldn't say you want to take it no matter what. If your opener tells you to be strong, to want to play tempo, I would much rather take an augment that gives me tempo that way instead. Any augment that just generates gold passively for you, for example, like Hustler or Going Long, like you don't care about econ at all. Like those augments, you really want to play around Bilgewater or Yordles. We are experimenting with this line a little bit more, but because the strength of trade sector for us feels like the fact that you have 3 free rolls by 2-3, which means that you can unlock Bard with just 1 paid roll, and you can maybe even play around like tempoing with Bard. It's just something we're definitely experimenting with, and it's not like a proven way to play the game, but from what we've like tested around, it does feel like a very interesting and like spot dependent line, that doesn't feel bad at all. Is the Yordle opener something you commit at 2-1, or can you hold those units until you get 4 Yordle? The issue about holding the units until you get 4 Yordle is just that like the units may not be upgraded, which means that you might be weak, and I think it's just better to play whatever your strongest is. Like if you have upgraded Rumble 2, then I'm more inclined to hold it. But if you're like Rumble 1, Teemo 1, Tristana 1, then like I'm just play something else. Yeah. With that, I think I'm gonna end the recording, but feel free to keep asking questions. But yeah, I'm gonna end the recording here.